I'm pursuing a master's degree in special education with a certificate in ABA. My purpose, in short, is to learn more and to make myself more marketable. From the article The Adult Learner, a Neglected Species by Knowles, 1973, this would fall under the categories of learning-oriented and goal-oriented in adult learning. I've kind of always wanted a master's degree. I like going to school, I like learning things, but I think I also like accomplishing things. I hope to accomplish a lot of good work in special education with more knowledge. I had my 2 kids after I got my bachelor's degree, and so I put school on hold. My motivation is to become a better special education teacher and for my kids. I want to serve my student population better. I feel there is so much I have yet to learn about teaching students effectively with special needs. I also want to show my daughter in particular that women can aspire to be and do anything they want to do. I want to be an example of hard work for my children and show them how important it is to work hard in school and what you can accomplish from this. Special education is a combination of effective practices and trial and error. In order to teach effectively, teachers must have the knowledge to implement practices that have been proven effective. Teachers in special education also have to go through a process of trial and error with their students. Not all effective practices will work with an individual, but if the teacher has knowledge of other practices and he/she has developed his own theory of learning and ideas from coursework, then the teacher will be more prepared for the learning of the students that have more severe and challenging behaviors and learning needs. Today, thousands of children in Texas get to enjoy a free education every day that is often looked at as a right. But this was not always the case. Education has been shaped by the needs of the American culture in its teachers' practices and as a right for all students to enjoy. I'm so grateful that the United States makes it a right of every student to receive this free public education, especially for our students in special education who so desperately need this. Our evolution in the United States has also undergone growing pains. The shaping of the educational system in the United States occurred as the demands for technology increased. According to a brief history of education in the United States, the role of education changed as technology in the country changed. Because the United States is a first world country and an industrial nation, the demands for technology are always increasing. As technology in the course of the history of the United States has changed, the educational system of America has had to keep pace with an ever-changing component of society. Early in the history of the United States, education became free and funded by the public. Education became free so that all students could enter into this system of growing knowledge. It is theorized that one of the reasons why the American school system grew so quickly is because the local government was in charge of the decision making. The locals could see the needs of their community and choose to fund values that were important to them. The educational system focused on qualities that were in demand at that time, and more interest and emphasis was put on teaching. Philosophy shifted from traditional to more progressive beliefs about education. Traditional school reminds me of what you would see on Little House on the Prairie or other movies or settings. There is one schoolhouse for multiple grade levels in it. The teacher does mostly direct teaching, and it is very simple. I remember playing teacher with my cousins and sister when I was growing up, and we always modeled our teaching after the traditional school. The philosophy shifted to more progressive beliefs that influenced the education system, where the teacher worked to create an environment that was conducive to children learning and retaining information instead of learning in isolation and forgetting the concepts. As education grew, so did the population's interest in what and how their children were learning. Learning became viewed as a social concept. The question then and the question now remains, what components should be gleaned and utilized to create a practice that will be most beneficial to the American student? Do we believe that education should teach for the future and what the children will face in their lifetime instead of using approaches that are outdated? Traditional school does have some value to it. For instance, some practices advocate for drilling to help facilitate the memorization of material. The knowledge is needed in order to do something, but the second part of this is application, and a lot of this could come from a progressive view where teachers are facilitating learning. From this course, I learned that effective teaching is not about the selection of just one theory or even using all theories at once to teach multiple students, but it is about developing your own theory based off of your accumulated knowledge and taking bits and pieces from each of the theories to develop your own beliefs as an educator of best practices. It seems that one of the most crucial things that we can do is to help avoid filling students with our own personal beliefs and instead allowing them to inquire and discover on their own, similar to Dewey's beliefs. Moran's beliefs that interdisciplinary studies was a critical connection between disciplines and that interdisciplinary studies challenged the study of only one discipline. This makes me think of my school and some things that a principal has said to us recently. She has said that the practices of general education teacher and special education teacher are overlapping so much that it is no longer appropriate to be specialized only in your one area. General education teachers are now responsible to know how to implement accommodations and how to modify their instruction in the classroom. Special education teachers need to know and apply the curriculum. Moran also identified over-specialization and additionally bureaucracy as cons for learning only one discipline, and that the specialization of disciplines causes exclusivity, defined territories, and vested interests within the discipline. When I relate this to special education, I agree. We do become exclusive at times. We have a specific territory and there are vested interests. A wide array of knowledge helps to break down some of these barriers and is necessary in the modern world of teaching. Both students in general education and special education need the expertise of a well-oiled machine working together to provide the best services possible. Nisani argued that interdisciplinary studies is necessary and that it is dangerous to have disciplines that are unable to communicate with one another. Nisani gave examples of instances in the United States where a discipline created something new or a new procedure that overlooked information from an interdisciplinary approach and was dangerous or not useful to the public that could have been easily avoided with communication. I can see this in education. A special education that does not have the knowledge of a general education teacher will not understand the natural progression of the curriculum and the steps that are needed for the student in special education to reach the goal of performing on grade level. A general education teacher that is unable to communicate with the discipline of special education is also just as detrimental to a student as they may be unable to understand how to best provide services to a student in special education. In both cases, it is the student that suffers and it is dangerous to their education, requiring that specialists from cross disciplines are able to effectively communicate with each other. The population of special education comes from a diverse educational context all on its own. Students in special education come from varied backgrounds, languages spoken, cultures, ethnicities, religions, and family dynamics. One of the most interesting readings to me was that of Anyon and the social class and hidden curriculum of work, where she examined several different schools with varying degrees of social class and found that students are being trained in different manners according to their socioeconomic standings. Students of working class families are being taught in a manner that is appropriate for training a low-wage worker that does not involve creativity. Middle class students are also being trained to find a correct answer and follow step-by-step instructions. The affluent school students are being taught to negotiate and develop more creative skills, and the students at the elite schools are being trained in a manner that prepares them for the operation of business and control. According to these findings, teachers are teaching students to remain in their varying social classes. This bias is perpetuating a cycle of continual low class and high class divide with little hope of escape, since students are being taught at a young age in their most malleable states to conform with the patterns of their social class. Should students be more intermixed in schools to be more heterogeneous and potentially equalize the types of education afforded to the students in lower classes? It also makes me think of special education. Should students be educated less in self-contained and resource classes, and this education be implemented more in the general education classroom where the teaching, belief, and hidden curriculum can be theoretically higher for the students in special education? One of the works that I have read the most about this summer was by Fryer in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. At first, it seems a difficult read, but once it is more delved into, his theories seem relevant to today's students. Fryer focuses on advocating for minorities to be conversed with and not spoken at, to allow students to engage in inquiry, and to free students to allow for creativity and expressive thinking. He views the teaching system as a traditional model wherein the teacher engages in what he considers the banking system, where the teacher is a dictator, placing the knowledge that society has dictated be taught into the minds of the students who are expected to comply and memorize instructions. He advocates for the building of trusted partnerships, a respect for the student, and using dialogue with the student to incorporate the strengths and interests of the learner. I think about students in special education with this because sometimes as their teachers, we are so focused on what they don't know and what we need to teach them because they are so far behind that we end up becoming bankers and using a banking system instead of a facilitator. We can easily miss the strengths that these students do have, and that part of our job as their teachers is to find and build on these talents to prove useful to the students. We are to enter into dialogue with students, even those who are nonverbal, by taking a moment to slow down and listen, find out what he or she likes and what they can do, help them to experience learning and not just tell them what to do. This makes me think of my ILT students and how I see part of my job as to help them experience their community, not to teach and show them everything, but I need to help them make their own discoveries. There are many different learning theories, and none of them is the best one overall, but there may be a best fit for each student depending on their styles of learning and their unique needs. The behaviorist view, for instance, has worked with one of my nonverbal students with autism and aggression. He was very disinterested in school and work, but he was interested in earning rewards. I used a token economy with him where he earned a token for each of his completed tasks or when he exhibited a top behavior. One of the important things with the behavior is to reinforce the behavior immediately if possible. With some students, a cognitive approach of learning may be efficient, where the student explores the classroom and inquires into what they want to learn. The curriculum would build on the student's prior knowledge, and assessments would be ones that show growth, such as portfolios or demonstrations. I often would take pictures of my students' work, and when it was time for their art, I would make a slideshow that showed them growing throughout the year and the work that they created. Many parents were brought to happy tears as they could actually feel and see that their students were growing and developing instead of an assessment on paper that may or may not have meaning to them. This one aspect that I like, and I would like to focus on my ability to collect meaningful projects for portfolios to show parents this year, even more so than I did last year. Constructivism values the learner and the environment, but focuses on real-world application. So many students in special education may be able to learn a task but not apply it in a real-world setting. I really need to work on this in the upcoming year as I find meaningful experiences for my students to practice their knowledge in outside of the classroom setting. For instance, my student that I am working on money with may collect money for something for the school and help to count it. She may help sell something for our field trip. I feel that I need to grow in my ability to actively search for these experiences for my students that so desperately need this. Latz and Billing argued that in order to reach diverse students, teachers needed to ensure that students feel successful in the classroom. Her focus was on African American students, but this is also very relevant for students in special education. Students in special education have experienced failure after failure. They need success in order to be reached. Something that I need to make sure that I am doing this year is scaffolding instruction in order to build confidence, instead of just jumping in and starting teaching. She also advocates that it is not enough to show students how to identify social injustice, but it is necessary to teach the student to fight their own battles. This is important for students to have these social skills. With so much pressure on academics, it is easy to neglect the necessary social skills. This is also something that I need to build on this upcoming year. I need to include social skills into my academic classes for my students with special needs. Lee also encouraged the incorporation of student culture in education. Student culture is not necessarily the focus of my students in special education, but many points that Lee makes are both applicable and helpful. The students are engaged more when their home life is incorporated into school. For one student, I had his mom take pictures of places he had been in, stores that he likes going to, and we used his real-life pictures for social studies and for a community lesson that incorporated reading skills. He was very interested in the assignment. The incorporation also benefits the parent, the student, and the teacher. It makes work easier for the teacher, develops stronger community ties, higher parent participation and involvement, and engaging students in real-life settings. I need to find out more about my families from this year and find their strengths and what they can do to help their child in my classroom. Harrower's article sounded the most like my classroom. He spoke of the history of inclusion that has come from exclusion to the debate of present day that argues about the inclusion of students with severe disabilities. While I agree that my students need positive role models, friendships, and to develop more typical interactions, I also realize that this is on a case-by-case basis. Each student should be looked at as an individual with its own set of circumstances. Some of my students do not yet have the skills to try and learn in the general education classroom for academics. Some of them, it becomes a more restrictive environment. I have formed the opinion that the least restrictive environment is not always the general education classroom for all students with special needs. And if you would have worked with my students the past couple of years, then you may have formed a similar opinion. I will do everything I can to get them experiences with their typically developing peers, but it is not always in their best interest to be educated in the same classroom. Let's meet these students where they are, and instead of pushing a theory of where all students with special needs should be and believing that all students should be educated in the general education classroom, let's look at the student first and see where their needs are best being met. Let's scaffold their instruction behavior-wise to build up their behavior and their confidence so that they can actually be successful when they are able to be in the general education classroom. And let's take this on a case-by-case basis. One size fits all has never been a standard in special education, so why should it be for placement? Well, thanks for listening. That's all.